The fly's turn. One day, the fly buzzed past the lion's nose and whispered, "You may not roar anymore, but you are still alive. And because you are alive, you are still a king." The sun had returned after days of quiet rain, and the savannah sparkled with life. Pools formed in every dip in the earth. Green shoots pushed up through the soft soil. Animals of all kinds stepped out to drink, bathe, and stretch their limbs under the warm light. High on his rock, the lion Mkali rested in the sun. His golden mane was damp from the rain, but his eyes were bright, watching the world below. No sound came from him, not a roar, not even a growl, but the world watched him just the same. Above him, the small fly named Ndid buzzed lazily in loops and twirls, dancing on the air. She was no bigger than a raindrop, yet she moved with purpose, zipping around the lion's head, tickling his whiskers now and then. Once, long ago, Mkali might have batted her away or growled in irritation. But not now. Now, he watched her with curious respect. "Still dancing, little one?" Mkali's eyes seemed to say, even though his mouth did not move. Ndid landed lightly on the lion's nose, bold as thunder. Her wings glistened in the light like shards of a broken rainbow. "You've grown quiet, mighty king," Ndid said in her high, humming voice. "But still you sit. Still you breathe. Still you matter." Mkali blinked slowly. She knew he could not answer her in words, not anymore. But Ndid didn't need an answer. She remembered the day he had lost his voice, the day when silence fell like a heavy curtain across the savannah. She had flown close, worried that his silence would also mean his end. But it didn't. The lion stayed. He adapted. He changed. And in doing so, he became something greater than a roar. Now, it was her turn to speak. "You may not roar anymore," she whispered gently, "but you are still alive. And because you are alive, you are still a king." Mkali's whiskers twitched, and his nose wrinkled. The smallest puff of air escaped through his nostrils, almost like a sigh. His golden eyes met hers, steady and calm. A breeze passed between them. The moment felt still, and Ndid's tiny body glowed with pride. She had always been small. Always swatted at. Always ignored. No one had listened to a fly. Until now. She remembered the early days, when she would zip through the tall grasses, barely noticed. She saw the way lions chased zebras, how leopards stalked silently, how hyenas circled in the dark. She remembered thinking, what can a fly do in a world this loud? But that question no longer haunted her. She had found her answer. It wasn't in how loud she could buzz, or how fast she could fly. It was in the way she noticed. In the way she lingered. In the way she cared. And now, the lion, the once mighty king, was listening. She hovered beside his ear, as if to say more. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the smallest voices carry the greatest truths. I used to envy your roar. But now I know, even a whisper has power." Below them, the world continued. A group of antelope crossed a shallow pool. Birds flitted from tree to tree, singing fresh songs. But high above it all, the lion and the fly shared a moment of mutual honor. Mkali, who had once ruled with strength and sound, now ruled with presence and peace. And Ndidi, who had once been nothing more than a buzzing blur, now spoke for those who had no voice. Together, they were a strange pair, a silent lion and a talking fly. But together, they reminded the world of something important. Life matters. However loud, however small. Mkali stood slowly, his muscles rippling like quiet rivers beneath his fur. He turned his great head toward the east, where the sun was climbing higher in the sky. Ndidi lifted from his nose and flew in a wide circle above him. Then, as if pulled by the same invisible rhythm, they moved. The lion walked the edge of the hill, and the fly zipped beside him. No roars. No fanfare. Just quiet strength and purposeful flight. The wind swirled. The birds stilled. And for just a moment, all of the savannah seemed to hush, not in fear, but in reverence. The lion was alive. The fly was free. And both had found meaning in their being. That evening, when the stars blinked into the sky, Ndidi returned to the lion's rock. She rested on his paw and looked up at the constellations, her wings folding gently. Even the stars are small, she said aloud, more to herself than to him. But look how much they light the world. Mkali didn't move. He didn't need to. She knew he agreed. The world didn't need just lions with loud roars. It needed watchers, listeners, beings who stayed, who cared, and who reminded others that being alive, truly, wholly alive, was a gift worth protecting. Even if all you could do was buzz. The fly spoke and the world listened. The fly stood on the lion's nose and spoke softly. He cannot speak. He cannot roar. He cannot move. But I am here. And I am alive. The sky was stained with the colors of a fading sun, a quiet purple bleeding into a warm orange that kissed the earth goodbye. The breeze moved slowly, as if it, too, were reflecting on all it had seen that day. Crickets chirped in quiet rhythm, frogs began their gentle chorus, and the fireflies blinked one by one like stars fallen to the ground. Atop a large, smooth rock at the heart of the savannah, the lion Mkali lay still. Still as stone. Still as the bones of ancient beasts buried deep beneath the soil. Animals gathered around, not in fear, but in reverence. There was no growl to warn them away. No golden eyes to narrow with might. No heavy paws to stamp the ground in command. Mkali was gone. The roar that once thundered through the hills was now an echo of memory. His great body, though regal even in silence, no longer carried the force that once bent the wheel of the wild. Yet, even in death, he held a kind of presence that drew the curious, the mourning, and the wise. And upon his nose, no larger than a raindrop, stood the fly, Ndidi. Her wings shimmered in the twilight, fragile and light as breath, yet filled with meaning. She had lived near Mkali in his last days, buzzing close, watching quietly, speaking rarely. But now, when all had hushed, she found her voice again. She landed softly on his nose, close to the space between his great eyes. The wind stopped. The animals waited. Ndid did not speak loudly. She had no roar, no command. Only the soft, steady hum of a creature that knew her place in the story. He cannot speak, she said gently, bowing her head. She looked around at the gathering antelopes, zebras, hornbills, even snakes culling in silence. He cannot roar anymore. He cannot chase. He cannot fight. The creatures lowered their heads. But she continued, I am here. And I am alive. A murmur moved through the crowd, not of voice, but of thought. Ndid fluttered her wings and rose a little higher into the air. Once, he was everything. Thunder and fire. Teeth and pride. And I was just a whisper, a tickle on the wind. She landed again, this time on Mkali's ear, where she had often whispered stories he never told anyone he'd heard. But now, she said, he is quiet. And I am not. There was no arrogance in her tone. Just a still, a clear truth that hovered between her and those listening. His silence teaches, she said. It tells us that power ends, but presence does not. She turned to the young ones in the crowd, fox cubs, baby hippos, giraffe calves stretching their necks high. You may be small, she said, her wings pulsing softly, and you may feel powerless. But as long as you breathe, you carry something he no longer can. She paused. Possibility. The word fell like a seed into soft soil. Mkali cannot change the world now. But you can. I can. The wind can. Even the rain, when it falls in just the right place, can make a desert bloom. The animals leaned in closer. And I am a fly, she said with a hum of laughter in her voice. I have no claws. No teeth. But I can land on a mountain. I can crawl into the ear of an elephant. I can whisper to a child. I can sing to the sun. She buzzed over the lion's nose and hovered where his breath once puffed clouds into the cold. You see, it was never about size, she said. It was about being here. Being now. Ndid landed one last time on the lion's paw, so large it had once left prints that scared birds from the trees. But we should not forget him, she said. Because he was power. And his power taught us to respect, to pause, to listen. Without Mkali, we may have forgotten how strong the world can be. There were nods. Even the quiet tears of a mother warthog. And so, she said, we carry him with us. Not with ear. But with memory. With gratitude. She rose slowly into the twilight sky. He cannot speak. He cannot roar. He cannot move. But I can. And I will. She turned her eyes to the stars above. I will speak, she promised. For the ones who can't. For the ones who forgot. For the ones still learning. A breeze lifted her upward like a blessing. And below, the animals began to scatter, not in haste, not in panic, but in calm. In peace. They had listened. And they had understood. Even the lion's silence had meaning. Even the fly's whisper had power. That night, in the heart of the savannah, the stars blinked a little brighter. The cricket sang a little louder. And somewhere between the pulse of grass and the hush of wind, the world remembered a truth too often forgotten. To be alive is the greatest power of all. The power of being alive. Moral: protect your life, because you are important when alive, however small you might be. The savannah awoke with a softness that morning. The usual crackle of the dry grass, the distant rumble of wildebeest hooves, and the rustle of wind through acacia trees felt quieter, more thoughtful. Word had spread through the wildlands: Mkali the lion, the king whose roar once shook the earth, was gone. And yet, something unexpected was rising in his absence. Life. It buzzed, it bloomed, it breathed. And among the many voices of life now heard, one in particular stood out: the fly. Small, winged, almost invisible to the eye, but now seen, now remembered, now respected. Indeed, the tiny fly had spoken truth on the lion's still body. And the animals, from mighty elephants to shy bush babies, had listened. Not just to her words, but to the lesson behind them. That night, after her speech, many animals lay awake in their burrows and nests, not from fear as they had in the lion's reign, but from reflection. And as the days passed, things began to shift in subtle but beautiful ways. The monkey troop, usually noisy and wild, began to teach their young not just how to swing from trees, but how to help each other when they fell. The crocodiles, who once snapped without care, started watching before they struck, considering the balance of the river they all depended on. Even the jackals, who were known for selfish tricks, began to share food with weaker members of their pack. All around, life seemed to grow kinder. Not because a king ruled over them with fear, but because a fly had reminded them what it meant to be alive. Indeed, for her part, did not claim a throne or demand worship. She did not change her flight or boast of her new fame. Instead, she did what she had always done: she flew. She flew through thorny bushes and over muddy watering holes. She flew past lion cubs who now looked at her with wide-eyed wonder instead of trying to swat her away. She buzzed stories to beetles, and danced in the dust where her shadow fell small but proud. And one day, as she landed near a young tortoise chewing on wild figs, he looked up and asked, "Indeed, why did you speak?" She tilted her wings thoughtfully. "Because I had something to say." And because she pointed to the lion's distant resting place, could not say it anymore. The tortoise blinked. "But you're so small." Indeed smiled. "Yes. But I am alive. And as long as I breathe, I can do things he can't." The tortoise nodded slowly, processing the wisdom. "So, even I, slow as I am, matter." "More than you know," said Indeed. "Because you wake with the sun, and you carry stories on your back. You may not roar, but you move. And in movement, there is purpose." Later that week, a group of young impalas gathered under a mayula tree and asked her, "How do we know we are important, even if we are weak?" Ndid landed on a leaf and told them a story. "There was once a great windstorm that knocked over a giant baobab tree," she began. "It blocked the river, and all the animals were afraid. The elephants pushed, the rhinos pulled, but the tree would not move. Then a colony of ants came unnoticed. They worked together, digging beneath, carrying small bits away, little by little. And in time, the tree shifted. The river flowed again." She paused. No one remembered the elephants. But they all remembered the ants. The impalas whispered among themselves, their eyes bright. Ndid became something of a teacher. Not because she had planned it, but because others asked. They wanted to understand what she understood, the power of being alive. She taught the owls that silence can be wisdom, not weakness. She taught the snakes that waiting is not the same as being forgotten. She taught the warthogs that laughter heals faster than anger. And in every whisper of wind, in every rustle of tall grass, the land echoed with a new truth. You are important when you are alive. And yet, life wasn't perfect. Danger still lurked. Hawks still hunted. Storms still came. But the animals faced these things differently now, not just with fear, but with value for each other. They had learned from a lion how to be mighty. But from a fly, they learned how to be meaningful. In time, a memorial stone was placed where Mkali had last rested. Not a statue of gold or a sculpture of fangs, but a simple rock with this carved into it. Here lay the king whose roar ruled the world. But in his silence, a fly taught us to live. Many came to see it. Not to mourn, but to remember. To remember that while power is loud, life is quiet. While strength may shake the earth, it is presence that plants seeds. And in the smallest creatures, the biggest truths are often born. Years later, a young lion cub stood before that rock with wide paws and curious eyes. He turned to his mother and asked, "Mama, can a fly really matter more than a lion?" The lioness smiled. "Not more," she said. "But enough." The cub looked at the tree where Ndid used to perch and whispered, "Then I want to be a fly." His mother chuckled. "You already are, my love. You are small now, but alive. That's where it begins." And with that, the cub roared, not to scare, not to rule, but just to feel the joy of breath in his lungs. Above, the wind stirred gently. And somewhere, in the whisper of wings, Ndid flew on. The legacy of life. The lion's roar was mighty, but his legacy was not in power. It was in the lives he touched, the lessons he left, and the quiet strength that came from even the smallest of creatures. The savannah had changed. Time had moved on, as it always did, but something had shifted in the very air. The sun rose differently now. The winds felt gentler. And when night fell, the stars above twinkled a little brighter. Life was moving forward, but the memory of the great lion, Mkali, lingered just as Ndid had hoped it would. His was not a story of brute strength or endless battle. It was not a story of how loud one could roar or how wide one could stretch their territory. It was a story of life itself, of being alive. Now the animals walked with a different understanding. They knew that every creature had its time, but also its place, no matter how big or small. And sometimes, the smallest creatures could make the most powerful impact. In the heart of the savannah, the animals came together every year to celebrate what they called the Festival of the Breath. It was a day for all the creatures to gather, to remember, to celebrate the gift of life and all that it brought. And each year, they told stories. Stories of the past, stories of the present, and stories of what they hoped for in the future. Every animal shared their part, some sang songs, some danced, and others told tales of bravery, of kindness, and of growth. This year, though, the tale they were most eager to tell was one that would never fade, the story of the lion and the fly. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the grasslands, Ndid, who had long since become a quiet legend in her own right, flew to the center of the gathering. The animals waited for her, not in awe, but with deep respect. She had not changed. Her wings still shimmered in the soft light of evening. She was still small, still fragile, yet her presence commanded more attention than any king or queen. With a gentle buzz, she took her place atop the rock that had become the central gathering spot. Tonight, I share the story not of power, but of life, Ndid said, her voice a soft hum that reached every ear. The animals, old and young, settled in closer, their eyes fixed on the little fly whose words seemed to hold more weight than all the roars of the lions. The lion, Mkali, taught us many things, Ndid continued. He taught us how to respect strength, how to bow before the mighty forces of nature. But he also taught us something else, something far more precious. She paused, allowing the wind to carry her words across the savannah. He taught us the value of our lives, every life. No matter how large or how small. When we are alive, we have a purpose. When we breathe, we matter. The creatures listened intently, their hearts feeling the weight of her words. And yet, she continued, we are not promised forever. Mkali, the mighty lion, is no longer with us. But his legacy lives on in each of us. Ndid flew in a slow circle above the gathering, the light from the stars and the moon casting an ethereal glow on her tiny form. It is not enough to be powerful. It is not enough to be feared. We must be alive in ways that make the world better, even in small ways. She landed gracefully on the ground again, closer to the animals gathered. What will your legacy be? What will you leave behind when you are gone? The animals were silent for a long while, each pondering her words. The festival that had begun as a time for joy had become a time for reflection. A young lion cub, who had been listening intently, raised his paw. Ndid, he said shyly, what do you mean by what will we leave behind? How can we, who are so small or weak, leave anything? Ndid smiled warmly at him. Everything you do matters, little one. You are alive. You may be small now, but you can change the world in ways you don't even realize. Every act of kindness, every word of wisdom, every moment you take to truly listen, makes a difference. The cub thought about this for a moment. But I want to roar like Mkali, he said quietly. I want to be powerful and strong. And you can be, Ndid replied. But real strength comes from within, from knowing who you are and what you are capable of. You don't have to roar to be heard. You don't have to be big to make an impact. The evening stretched on, and Ndid continued to speak to the animals, reminding them of the importance of every breath they took, of every action they made. She told them that, just like the trees, the rivers, and the skies, they were part of a greater whole, a story that had no end, only new beginnings. As the stars shimmered above, Ndid's wings fluttered softly. We are all a part of the great circle, she said. And just as Nkoli's roar echoed across the land, so too will the quiet acts of love and kindness that we perform every day. Our presence is our power. And that is more than enough. The animals began to stand, one by one, and they turned their faces to the horizon, feeling the truth of Ndid's words settle in their hearts. The lion's legacy was not about his strength or his roar, but about the way he had lived, and the way his silence had taught them the value of their own lives. As the night deepened and the savannah settled into peaceful sleep, the creatures carried with them the lesson they had learned, that every life, no matter how small, mattered. That their time on this earth was precious and worth protecting, for their lives held power far beyond what they could imagine. And so, as Ndid flew off into the cool night sky, she felt at peace. Her message had been heard, her purpose fulfilled. The savannah had learned, and in time would never forget. The lion's roar was mighty, but his legacy was not in power. It was in the lives he touched, the lessons he left, and the quiet strength that came from even the smallest of creatures.